In the land of the wyverns, most ecosystems would appear to be dominated by the great reptiles. However, in the warm equatorial and arid regions, not only do the giant Carapaceons provide a notable role in megafaunal assemblages, they may be key players in trophic processes. So let's explore the Daimyo Hermitaur and the Shogun Ceanataur. Daimyo and smaller Hermitaurs can often come into conflict with people when resting below the sand, and presumably at least some of these encounters are opportunistic, when people essentially walk over them and presumably startle the resting Hermitaur. Not all of us are lucky enough to have a giant sand bed, so instead, why not try a manta sleep mask for a similar level of calm and comfort? A calm and comfort you can take anywhere with you, as the masks are both compactable and durable, so they can even fit in your pocket for use on shorter journeys, and the lightest of luggage for longer ones. As well as in the home, I've used mine for travelling, and they work excellently to shut out all light and external influences, no matter how flattened they get in my bag. Even for just the regular sleep mask, you can still get the slim and maximum models, with a thinner headband and greater eye space respectively. So no matter how you sleep or what shape your head is, Manta Sleep have you covered. As well as those, there's silk, cool, steam, weighted and pro masks for those who may benefit from some extra creature comforts. There's also the Bluetooth sleep mask, so you can listen to me, or someone else, or music I guess, as you sleep. And if you buy any item from Manta's website with my code UHC, not only will you get the 10% discount, but you'll be eligible for a giveaway to win a Bluetooth mask. Just place your order with my code UHC, screenshot your order and email it to me at my address in the description, and I'll randomly pick a winner in 48 hours. So to start, one thing that may seem a burning question with both crabs is how they're both able to handle being so far from water for such prolonged periods. Crabs are most well known for their water-adjacent lifestyles after all. But with that said, there are groups known as land crabs, ones that are essentially terrestrial animals that are most comparable to Daimyo and Shogun. Of such crabs, they likely fall under grade T4 or T5 of land crabs, the most specialised for terrestrial lifestyles, with a deciding factor stemming from how the giant crabs reproduce, which is so far unknown. It could be worth noting that whilst both species have colonised both deserts and volcanoes, very arid biomes that are effectively considered the final frontier for land crabs to adapt to, in most cases in Monster Hunter, such areas are still often water adjacent. Every desert map has either an oasis, accessible underground aquifers, or a river, and most old world volcanoes where Shogun is fought appear to be part of the volcanic belt, a large coastal strip of land where most of the older volcano maps seem to be accessed by boat. So should the crabs need either water for themselves or for reproduction, it's probably not a stretch for them to get it. Daimyo are specified not to necessarily prefer water, but chiefly sand most of all, and are often seen in coastal areas too. Earlier entries also state they spend most of their time underground, coming to the surface chiefly to feed, and indeed their ecology video and intro cutscenes often depict them resting under the sand or other substrate. Much of this may still be their need to escape hot daytime temperatures and avoid desiccation. As well as this, Daimyo may well just have tissues well adapted to both hold more water than average, but resist desiccation too. It's worth noting this is only in regards to desert Daimyo. Jungle Daimyo likely live in a wet enough environment that water isn't a big issue. Volcano-dwelling shoguns may be in a similar boat, partially burying themselves in shale and scree or using their superior mobility to climb to cooler, exposed or well-ventilated areas and escape the impressive heat of the inner magma chambers. It's unknown whether either species originate from fresh or salt water, and arguments can likely be made for both. But as with some estuarine land crabs, the two likely have a very broad range of salinity tolerance, and this allows them to take advantage of both coastal and inland waterways for a generally broad range. Both species may still have some dependence on water though, and despite the large adults being found dozens of miles from water sources, their distribution may still hug rivers and coast systems in the extreme areas like deserts and volcanoes. At press time, it's unknown if either species is present in the New World. So far, there don't seem to be any records of them. Just how well adapted they are to land may well affect this, as the most specialised land crabs have well-developed lungs that can't actually breathe properly underwater, making them susceptible to drowning. If Shogun and Daimyo are similar, then this could explain their current absence. If not, reproduction may also play a hand in it. Even large land crabs like coconut crabs, that still have oceanic young, can have limited distribution due to intra-island currents not facilitating their dispersal to new islands. So if either Hermitaurs or Ceanataurs reproduce in similar fashion, even with abbreviated development, the straits between the old and new world may still provide an impassable barrier for them to cross. Their absence is of course only based on what we know now, and future games may reveal them alive and well in the new world. Or it's possible other members of the Carapaceon family have colonised the new world instead. The smaller individuals of the species still have their own shells, and these likely function as water retainers for them too. Hermit crab's success and the possible initial action of coming onto land may well have been facilitated by their shells, and their ability to hold water. The much smaller subadult Hermitaurs and Ceanataurs are likely much more vulnerable to desiccation than the massive adults, and so grow or find sufficient shells to hold water to protect themselves. The full-sized adults are far better able to resist dryness, and so whilst still wearing shells that could potentially provide something of a humid microclimate around the posterior, they're likely poor at holding water, what with them being full of holes and all. Creating something full of holes is also the other option for smaller crabs to resist desiccation, and both Hermitaurs and Ceanataurs also spend considerable amounts of time underground as well. Burrows may better trap moisture or even reach moisture in the soil, as well as providing a cooler, windless retreat from the exterior surfaces. And in some areas, like the rainforest surrounding the Great Lake close to Jumbo Village, known as the Second-Gen Jungle, or the volcano-adjacent marshlands known as the Second-Gen Swamp, the crabs may have considerable roles in ecosystem functioning. In coastal rainforests similar to the lakeside ones around Jumbo, land crabs are major seed and seedling predators, accounting for significant removal of young plants, and having the final say on who does or doesn't germinate. In some areas, land crabs can completely consume the entire seedling crop under the right circumstances. Their success in suppressing young plants can also partially exclude other seed predators too. On top of this, their burrows do make it easier for plants that do successfully take root. The crab habit of dragging leaf litter and biomass down into their burrows enriches the soil, and creates a very rich bed for successful growth. The Daimyos and smaller Hermitaurs may well have partially built the jungle around Jumbo, and be major ecosystem engineers in such environments. There may be some limits to this, and whilst they may also aerate and enrich the soil in the desert too, their lessened numbers and less biomass on offer may mean it's not quite the same effect, due to the lessened ecosystem productivity to work with. Similarly, the biomass being concentrated in fewer and larger individuals may also mean they don't quite achieve the same levels of ecosystem dominance as the smaller and more ubiquitous real land crabs do, evidenced by the presence of other herbivores like Aptonoth, and rootlers like Bullfango and Mosswine. As said in prior videos too, Hermitaurs and likely Ceanataurs of all sizes feed a vast array of other monsters. Crustaceans and decapods like crabs can often have a weird development, with a lot of very uncrabby stages. But crabs tending more towards a terrestrial lifestyle can have abbreviated development, where a lot of these stages are cut out, or even direct development. This is where the crabs take a more case-selected approach by crab standards, and have fewer larger young hatched from larger yolkier eggs. In some cases, even parental care. Either form of development would still result in huge amounts of small crabs being released into the ecosystem annually, and as a result, likely everything eats small Hermitaurs and Ceanataurs. Land crabs themselves have an extensive list of predators of varying degrees, with some being occasional generalists eating them as a free and easy protein, and others being more specialised in harvesting crabs as a primary food source. With a few obvious exceptions like presumably Aptonoth, just about every large and small monster likely hoovers up small Hermitaurs on their release. And even large predators not thought of as invertebrate eaters will lick up such small animals as abundant, easy sources of protein. Wyverns like Astalos may take crabs through much of their lifespan, and ones like the Yan bird wyverns and Espinas may get much of their food biomass from the crabs around the lake and possibly in the swamps too, being somewhat specialised as invertebrate eaters. The huge numbers of crabs then support high densities of these wyverns, who in turn fulfill their own ecosystem processes. Hunters and wyverians may also benefit from hermitaurs, especially as food, with land crab species also being economically important sources of food in our world. Crabs can function as food or fishing bait, or be sold live or dead at market for other goods or capital. The large size of hermitaurs also means their shells and other parts can be used in craft, decoration and armoury. The brains especially are considered high cuisine, and likely good money can be made from harvesting them. It's no surprise there are multiple historical records of people settling around the Jumbo area. As well as the village itself, there are ruins from much larger past civilizations, possibly the one that worshipped Kushala. With Espinas providing something of an elder deterrent, the high landscape productivity, and the important resource of the hermitaurs, it's no surprise multiple groups of people have settled here over time to take advantage of the crabs and the land they built. But when they're not also providing food for others, what are the crabs themselves eating? And the Shogun and Daimyo likely represent two ends of the spectrum when it comes to the crab way of getting one's daily bread, which is fast and predatory or slow and detritivore. Whilst there is a lot of leeway here, and most crabs will be predators or detritivores to some level, the Shogun Ceanataur is clearly the more predatory of the two, and for the most part likely a dedicated hunter of large vertebrate prey. In this regard, it's most similar to the ghost crab, a swift and keen predator of beaches that takes prey most typically similar to its own body size. Turtle hatchlings are a common prey especially, and Shogun in aspects of its feeding ecology is most likely a giant ghost crab. We see in its Sunbreak introduction it's an active predator, swiftly pursuing prey at speed and capable of predating other large monsters at least up to the size of a royal ludroth. Slagtoth, bird wyverns and amphibians may also be occasional prey items, and with their frequency and appetite, shoguns may well be an ecologically important, and possibly the most numerous, predator in the volcanic belt, with most of the other large monsters being mainly ore-eating durophages or less numerous. Other changes the crabs have made in general is shedding a pair of legs, and for Shogun this may well be an adaptation to speed. Both crabs have shed legs to save weight, energy and parts to molt, as hermit crabs only use 2 pairs of their legs to move as is anyway. But ghost crabs will use progressively fewer legs the faster their gait is, essentially running as bounding bipeds when at full sprint. Seeing as the Hermitaurs and Ceanataurs likely have fairly different origins with some convergence, the initial evolutionary prompt to shed legs may have been similar for both, with it later diverging into allowing greater speeds for the predatory shogun, who will also often leap after prey and the player too. Shogun's impressive scythe-like chela, or claws, have presumably lost much of their ability to grip, as effectively as Daimyo's at least. Yet Shogun can still be seen to deposit feed. This is effectively the action where a crab seems to eat sand, but rather is filtering the edible biomass like algae stuck in the sand out, and then rejecting the sand as a pellet. Despite differing morphology, ghost crabs can still deposit feed as efficiently as less predatory fiddler crabs, with how they filter with their mouth parts at least. So despite its more carnivorous nature, Shogun may still support itself in lean or unsuccessful periods with deposit feeding too. Taking a closer look at Shogun's chela, and it seems they've lost the pollex, or the moving thumb analogue of the claw. This makes them more similar to those of mantis shrimp, who despite being well known for their unique hammer claws for super punches, are more commonly seen with spear-like chela instead. This is typically used to spear and hold soft-bodied prey whilst hidden in the sediment. Whilst Ceanataurs haven't been seen to use a similar tactic on other monsters in the limited interactions witnessed, they will attempt to snare the hunter in this way though, and as well as pursuit predation, Shogun may be more flexible with their hunting strategies, and often ambush prey from beneath the substrate too. In contrast, Daimyo Hermitaur's chela are more what we'd think of when imagining crab claws, and are likely immensely strong. Coconut crabs are some of the largest of crustaceans, and have strong chela exerting pinching forces of almost 2,000 newtons, that shows a strong correlation with body mass. Estimates suggest the largest coconut crabs could generate pinches of over 3,000 newtons, more than the bite force of many terrestrial predators, and easily enough to handle coconuts and other crabs. If this continues to scale appropriately to crabs the size of daimyos, then there's likely no other monster daimyo couldn't eat with its huge claws. Even the carcasses of elders and monsters of equivalent rank would be fair game for the great crabs, as hermitaurs of all sizes likely do a fair bit of scavenging. The diet of hermitaurs is likely best described as anything organic. Plant matter, animal matter, feces, fungi, and algae all go down the hatch, with them being the great detritivores of the lakeside forests. Many normal crabs have similar such diets of incredible breadth, and can also be efficient scavengers, keeping some islands clear of the more irritating scavengers by eating all the carrion themselves. Meat may well be a preferred food source for hermitaurs if they can get it, and they're also likely just as keen scavengers, able to process the entirety of a carcass of any size. Whilst naturally occurring carrion may be something of a jungle rarity, due to the speed of decomposition and other invertebrates or microscopic life, the kills of predators provide another opportunity that the large daimyos may well be able to take. Whilst it may not seem in the nature of crabs to be kleptoparasites, the large coconut crabs have been observed to rob island goshawks of their kills, despite attempted defense from the hawk, with the crab relying on both armor and shielding itself with its claws much as daimyo does. Whilst large predatory wyverns like Rathian and Nagakuga may be able to keep the smaller hermitaurs at bay, the defense of the large daimyos may well make them near unstoppable when advancing on a kill, and kills made especially close to the lake shores in the jumbo area may be appropriated quickly. While some wyverns like Nagakuga likely select for the denser inland areas, where daimyo are less prevalent, as well as possibly selecting for smaller prey in the old world, it may be just another thing single Rathian preferring the more open areas have to lump in their difficult existence. The final option of obtaining meat is of course predation. With their lack of speed, cumbersome movements and sluggish behaviours, daimyo likely aren't skillful or frequent predators, but this doesn't mean they won't capitalise on good opportunities. The huge and slow coconut crabs will on occasion take the seabirds they share their islands with, either through opportunistic ambushes when the birds stray too close to hidden crabs, or at night whilst the birds roost. Daimyo may well be the same. Some quests report it as attacking people, and it does seem to show some interest in eating the hunter too. With the immense power of its claws, it may make similar opportunistic attempts on other creatures nearby, grabbing anything that strays too close, or picking off stranded wyverns at night that picked a poor roost. With the ability to easily cripple its opponent too, and no real need or understanding of a killing blow, death by daimyo is likely not a fast affair for those unlucky enough to fall to it. Cannibalism is another method of getting one's protein, for animals, and both crabs likely engage in this too. Although if anything like the crabs in our world, it may be a factor of both the quality and availability of the other foods on offer. So droughts or certain seasonal conditions may trigger the large daimyos and shoguns to start eating their subordinates, and those living all year round in the much tougher conditions of the desert and volcanic belt respectively may have a very different diet to those of their more mesic counterparts. And cannibalism may well form a large chunk of their diet, with the smaller crabs being some of the most common and easy to acquire food. Finally, it's probably worth a brief mention of the skull shells too. Considering they may not be ideal for holding water, and the large size of skull-wearing individuals has probably partially rendered that unnecessary, it seems the final and most important attribute of a shell is defense. In hermit crabs there's a preference for whole, undamaged shells, as presumably these function best for a strong defense. Whilst well armed and armoured from the front, the crabs would be vulnerable to attack from behind, and aren't that swift to turn. So whilst there are other ostensible factors that will force the large individuals to bigger wyverns, like simple availability and the shell needing to fit, it could be that there's possibly some selection for very hard-headed wyverns. Gravios with its rocky head that can withstand lava, and the Bloss Wyverns with their massive, robust skulls, capable of taking great impacts, may be so frequently observed due to their heads providing such ideal protection, and thus being heavily preferred by the large individuals. In some cases, other skulls like those of Glavenus may be used, but deviation from these species seems rare. The skulls of some other brute wyverns and elders seem ideal, and it may be possible other sparse records exist of some other species too, especially with some individuals being seen to utilise other objects as shells sometimes too. But at press time, it seems selection for certain species is clear, giving the large daimyos and shoguns their signature look. For my usual thoughts on the pair, I think they're both great monsters. Daimyo is almost a favourite monster, and I think they both started and stayed consistently good throughout the series. Considering they missed all of 3rd gen, 3/4 of 5th gen, and Shogun missed 4U, I don't think they're overexposed at all either. I've written about my love for 2nd gen's pink early game trio and how well they generally complement each other, and Daimyo is the opposite end of the spectrum to the fast, vicious Kutku, in that he's much slower and easier. Probably one of the easiest fights in 2nd gen as he doesn't have too much HP, and he's very slow with only a few attacks that'll put you on your ass, making him something of a minority in 2nd gen. Congalala is also somewhere in between the two. But this easiness isn't bad, as it provides a breather after Kutku, and most importantly, Daimyo has some of the best early game gear of any monster, that you can keep using pretty much up until Elders. He also generally gets more challenging in later games as well. Plum Daimyo and Emerald Congalala's new moves both feel like they're made to punish you for getting lazy around them, which is likely what most players would probably do after learning them earlier in the game and finding them pretty easy. Overall, I think Plum Daimyo is a pretty good subspecies, one that complements and builds on the ideas of base Daimyo. Shogun, on the other hand, feels like the original Seregios in some ways, with his face being such a big weak spot, and the insane reach of his 360 claw moves, making the usual wyvern tactic of hovering around him waiting for an opening untenable. He's a monster that really punishes caution, and encourages you to be aggressive and charge head-on to take him out as soon as possible. Some of his claw moves can be excessively obnoxious with their reach, that in smaller map zones can be near unavoidable, but overall he's still a pretty good fight, giving some good challenge and feeling like a nice change of pace from wyverns. And his excellent gear will effectively take you up to G rank as well. In general, the crabs do just have fantastic weapons and armour, and I also like the addition of his Teppanyaki Chef Leap in later games as well. Design-wise, the two also make a nice contrast with each other as well, with the slow, docile Daimyo being round and bulbous, whereas fast, hostile Shogun is effectively an angry collection of pointed edges. With their unique noises and mannerisms too, they have a lot of personality for what are just giant crabs. One thing I do feel with the crabs is that they have the potential to be more flexible with the skull aspect, or at least with Daimyo. A bit like I said for Nursilla, having that be a variation depending on the map or biome they're in, and then having that replace their subspecies and alter their fights, could be a cool touch. Never going to happen, as Capcom like having subspecies, but whatever. I also think it would apply more to Daimyo too. As for Shogun, with his broader range and greater danger, I think it was a really good idea for Rustraiser that he swaps skulls in the fight for different uses, changing up the tempo of the battle, and I think this is a good idea implemented so well that it should be absorbed into the base fight. For crabs as a whole, we could also do with some new ones. It's pretty crazy to think they haven't had new members added since 2nd gen, which is almost 20 years ago, and when the first ones were added. Crabs really lend themselves well to new and potentially interesting fights. Things like a fiddler crab that has sword and shield pincers with the big one and the thin one, or pom-pom crabs that stick different stuff on their pincers for different elements and ailments. There's a lot you can do with different families, to say nothing of other crustaceans like lobsters and mantis shrimp too, where their physiology naturally lends itself to good gameplay features. In short, give us more crustaceans. Thanks for watching, and thanks to top patron Phenomenon for their kindness in supporting the channel. as well as the Superist Duper, Amco the Terribles, Sonam Lobsong, K Sandom, Big L, Erengar Steiny, Flygon's Archives, Hui Hui, Original Username, Tristan Berry, Evilly, Howleth, Archosaur Queen, Seth Fake Last Name, Zacer, Dodecablos, and Bazugazu Bakuhatsu Bakumatsu for their ongoing generosity too. Thanks to Kamen Rider Moten for the digital artwork they provide for these videos too, and for the shots of monster anatomy. For more of their pieces, including ones not seen in these videos, be sure to follow them on their assorted social media with links provided in the description. Thanks as ever for all the comments on the last video. Some like Niaranga were actually pretty right to point out that one reason for Godzilla's size increase is just for the increasing height of buildings, and scaling Godzilla up to them, which went way over my head. I hadn't seen the trailer for Godzilla -1 before finishing editing the video, but it certainly looks interesting, and like a film with some real potential. There may well be further Godzilla videos down the line, but not at any point soon. Regarding Pacific Rim, I was not a big fan of its writing, and feel any gains made to try and add symbolism to the monsters was ultimately later lost in Del Toro's desire to have giant robots fight them. The nicest thing I can probably do for it is to say nothing at all. Otachi was cool though. I should also add that with some past designs like the Mondasian Cybermen, I don't think they're bad by any stretch, more that I agree with RTD that the initial fears that created them had become outdated, and an upgrade was generally needed. Hopefully everyone enjoyed the crab video, as they were the winners of the Patreon poll. To sign up and start voting yourself, a link is provided in the description, and the next video picked will be